Two friends, Mike and Doug, drive fast so they won't be late for their presentation. The moment they arrive, they take everything they need out of the car and hurry up to set up. Inside, they start getting ready, reading through their notes, and in the office, they hear a buzzing sound, and shortly after, they identify the source. Mike opens the device, attempting to fix it. Doug, shocked, reminds him that the presentation was about to start and rushes him.
I'll call you back.
Meanwhile, Jim asks Rick if he would run the new branch if their proposal goes through. Rick agrees, reminding him that he'll forget this conversation if the proposal doesn't get approved. Then before he leaves, Rick tells Jim that they're working on a Canadian version of tax splitting, and Jim was unprepared for this news and is shocked. Rick explains that Callahan is working on it and will also present. Jim thinks that it's a bad idea because Callahan would ruin the presentation. He suggests that Callahan explain it to him so he can present it instead, but Rick insists that that would be unfair to Callahan.
Okay, bald, scary-looking guy walking towards us right now.
After this, Jim goes to see Mike and Doug rehearse their presentation. Mick was still fixing the device, and Doug, seeing Jim approach, tells him to hurry up. Despite the rush, the two manage to fix it before Jim walks in. But Jim was already angry after his conversation with Rick, and Doug starts explaining to Jim about a free wireless internet signal that no one knows how to use across North America, but Jim doesn't look impressed.
Sorry, have you seen Star Wars? No.
They then move on to their invention, a pager, a cell phone, and an email machine, all combined into one device that they call the Pocket Link, and Jim tells them that they don't make things like that, and they're a commercial company, and they need a venture capitalist. He notices the meeting was about to start, so he leaves the room after telling them to change the name. Mike almost cries, and Jim begins his presentation to investors, and during the meeting, he suggests evading taxes to increase profits, and Rick was startled by the idea. Back in the shop, Doug and Mike announce that their phone project wasn't accepted, but they believe it's because no one listened, and also, nobody understood the product. As consolation, everyone gets to watch Raiders of the Lost Ark.
Steven Spielberg's Raiders of the Lost Ark. Letterboxd. No way.
That night, the others gather for movie night, but Mike stays awake, trying to come up with better names for the device. Back at his office, Jim gathers his belongings after his presentation about tax evasion, and he sits there quietly, contemplating what to do. The next morning, Jim visits Mike and Doug at their shop, Research in Motion. He tells them that he knows how to sell and market their phone. He promises to leave his current job if they make him CEO of Research in Motion, and the two friends were shocked by the request.
Sorry, I don't know who you think you are?
Jim tells them that their pitch was the worst he's ever seen, and this angers Doug, who tells Jim that they have a $16 million deal with US Robotics that hadn't been paid yet. They've been selling them modems, and Mike adds that they sent samples months ago, but now accounting isn't even answering their calls.
They know they can withhold payment to the last possible second and then crush you.
Jim tells them the company had screwed them over, and he says that he'll do the same thing, explaining that companies like that delay payments as long as possible and then break contracts. And angry, Mike and Doug decide to leave.
How much money do you got?
Before they do, Jim makes them an offer, $20,000 for half of the company and the CEO position. Mike hesitates, but Doug pushes back, and Jim asks who's in charge and realizes that Mike is. Doug urges him to say no.
Mike is in charge, and he says no.
And back in the shop, while the rest of the team plays games, Mike focuses on fixing the problem with US Robotics. He asks to invoice them for their order, and then comes back with bad news. Every sample US Robotics received was defective, and the order had been cancelled. After all their effort, everything now feels wasted.
Here's what you gotta do. You gotta call him back. You gotta Glengarry Glen Ross this guy.
Mike and Doug discuss what to do next. They debate Jim's offer again, and Mike wanted to accept, but Doug doesn't trust him, especially after seeing his hand-drawn business card. Mike, however, wanted to take the risk. And Mike practices a counteroffer for $500,000 for just 10% of the company, and Doug roleplays as Jim to help him practice. They negotiate and finally settle on 33% for $125,000.
25% for $250,000.
50% for $50.
When Mike finally calls Jim, he starts with that proposal. 33% for $125,000 and a shared CEO role. Both sides were thrilled.
1 point what?
What?
On Jim's first day at Research in Motion, he was shocked to learn that Mike borrowed $1.6 million from the bank to produce more modems for US robotics, and that the phones still don't work. Furious, Jim yells at the engineers to get off the internet and fix the problems, and Doug was angry that Jim was making decisions and tells Mike that Jim can't yell at their team.
I want to talk about these modems.
Well, there's nothing to talk about.
Jim then calls US Robotics and manages to sell them on the modems for the same $1.6 million. But soon after, he finds out that US Robotics is already developing its own competing version of their phone.
Prototype, Mike. A shell I can wave around at a meeting. It could be a complete piece of shit.
Jim asks when they can produce a prototype and is told that they'll take a year, but he doesn't want anything fancy. He just wants something to show at a meeting, even if it doesn't work perfectly. Mike refuses to rush it, and hearing this angers Jim, and he tells the team that they need to start building immediately because they're already a year behind US Robotics.
I don't care what you need to do. Get these f***ing nerds to drop everything and build this f***ing phone!
As they argue, one of the engineers walks in and tells them that his paycheck bounced. His girlfriend told him not to work there anymore until he gets paid, and Jim grows frustrated and smashes the phone in anger.
It looks like your account has exceeded its overdraft balance.
Later, Jim goes to the bank to review their account, and he's told that Research in Motion has exceeded its overdraft limit, and he asks if they would deposit $125,000 in check, and they confirmed that they did, but the company was still struggling. Realizing the severity of the problem, Jim asks the bank to pull his mortgage.
You're good.
Different guys, different...
Back in the shop, the engineers kept working, and Jim returns with a woman and introduces her as Shelley, his new assistant, who will help manage the company's finances and distribute paychecks every 2 weeks. He then calls in Mike and Doug, and he instructs Mike to build a working prototype, but Mike refuses to rush it. Jim reminds him that they're millions in debt and have no contracts or deals, so they need the prototype now. Ignoring him though, Jim manages to get John Woodman on the phone.
I'm not asking you! Mike.
But as he was about to talk, Doug disconnects the call. Jim and Doug argue, and Doug asks Mike what he wants. Mike points to the phone Jim was using and explains it's making white noise because the models from China produce a faint hissing sound. He says that he wants their product to be perfect and doesn't want to rush it.
I will build a prototype, but I'll do it perfectly or I don't do it.
Then he leaves the room. After Doug and Mike walk out, Jim gets back on the phone and asks Shelley to reconnect him with Woodman. Back with their engineers, Doug talks about how he stood up to Jim, and as they chat, Jim interrupts to tell them that they're going to Bell Atlantic in New York because Woodman wants to see the prototype. They now have until 8 a.m. the next morning to build it.
Build this thing tonight, okay?
With no time to waste, Mike decides to do it. He tells everyone that they'll all chip in to the work on the prototype, and they rush to buy the equipment that they need. Mike and Doug stay up all night in the shop, assembling the phone piece by piece, before falling asleep at their workstations. They wake up to Jim honking outside, and Mike goes to the car and tells him Doug wants to come, but Jim says to leave him behind, calling him a goof. Mike insists, but Jim refuses, and Jim shares what he calls the best advice that he'll ever receive. If you want to be great, you have to sacrifice, and the more painful the sacrifice, the greater the reward. Then Mike gets in the car and they head to the airport, and they fly to New York and they take a taxi straight to the corporate offices. During the ride, Mike spills something on his white shirt, and as he was cleaning it, Jim tells him how to behave in meetings. Then Mike asks why there's a phone number crossed out on Jim's notes. Jim opens up to him, revealing that he was fired from SNS, the company where he once worked. He recently remortgaged his house to pay their staff, so if what they're doing now doesn't work, he's really screwed. As they ride up the elevator, Jim tells Mike to never accept a drink at a meeting because showing thirst is a sign of weakness. Jim soon discovers that Mike had forgotten to bring the phone to their important board meeting, and Jim yells in frustration and tells Mike that he can draw a sketch, and when he turns to ask for a pen or paper, Mike goes back down the elevator.
Yeah, that's right. Oh, wait, here he is. No worries. Okay.
As the board gathers, Jim faces them alone, and he introduces the idea of a new kind of cell phone, but the members quickly realize that he's not a tech person. They mention that everyone was already trying to get emails on phones, and that they have a new model capable of connecting up to 10 devices. Just as things were seeming to fall apart, Mike arrives with the actual phone and takes over the pitch. The members didn't want to listen at first, but Mike starts by pointing out flaws in their current system, capturing their attention. He explains how their design works, showing that it can link more than 500,000 users on one network because it operates on a large and more advanced system. The board suddenly becomes interested and examines the prototype with growing excitement.
Try with your thumbs. Try typing with your thumbs.
Months later, Oprah showcases the BlackBerry on her show and it becomes a global sensation. Sales explode across markets, and by 2003, the company expands into a massive office filled with employees.
What I said, Ted Rogers wants to have lunch in the city, he booked Canoe.
The engineering team develops a new messaging feature, and when they present it to Jim, they explain that since text messages usually cost 10 cents each, using BlackBerry's data system allows them to market messaging as unlimited and free. The announcement sends the team into celebration. Later, Jim and Mike meet Yankowski, the CEO of Palm, over lunch, and Yankowski makes jokes that aren't funny, and Mike and Jim just sit there silently. Finally, he turns serious and tells them that he had nothing to do with US Robotics trying to bankrupt them, but Mike remains bitter.
We won't be able to move ahead with this. I'm sorry. Sorry.
Yankowski then makes an offer to buy Research in Motion entirely, including all of its stock, effectively planning a hostile takeover. Jim agrees, saying that it's better to get rich than to fight Yankowski in court for the next 5 years.
It's better to get rich now than to fight this guy in court for the next 5 years.
And Jim tells the engineers that they're going to lose the company. He explains that they need to sell 500,000 phones, and Doug warns that selling more devices could crash the entire system because it was only built to handle that many. Jim and Doug argue, and Jim takes Mike to the back room to talk privately.
What's a network limit load?
This is impossible.
Mike tells Jim that it's impossible to do what he's asking unless the carriers increase their capacity. Their phones use too much data. Hearing this, Jim tells him to shrink it. Mike argues that their engineers can't do it, and they need to recruit the best developers from Google and Microsoft, since their current talent, while strong, isn't really world-class.
Maybe top guys from Motorola or Microsoft or Google.
Ignoring the warnings, Jim pushes the marketing team to sell 1 million BlackBerries anyways, insisting that any technical issue are engineers' problems. After giving the orders, he boards a plane and meets Paul Santos, the head of physical engineering at Google. Paul mocks their phones, and Jim asks him to work with him, but Paul laughs and tells him that he's not moving to Canada and already has a contract with Google.
I'll give you $1 million if you sign right now.
Jim offers Paul a $10 million deal to break his contract with Google and join their company. Jim even proposes backdating the stock to $1 a share. While flying on his private jet, he brushes off calls from Yankowski, who wants to rename BlackBerry to Palmberry, after acquisition. Jim ignores him and instead confirms the deal with Paul, securing his move to the team. Once Paul joins, major changes follow, and he dismisses several salespeople and resigns them as brand promoters at tennis clubs where wealthy clients gather. Their loud and attention-grabbing approach was meant to turn the BlackBerry into a luxurious status symbol instead of just another piece of technology.
That you're interested in buying some of the corks for your corporation.
Sales jump drastically, but the network begins to strain under the heavy load, and news outlets start reporting the problems with BlackBerries. Mike works to fix the server issue with help from Verizon, and Jim calls and reminds him that their deal is simple. Get the servers working, then sell the phones. When Mike asks if he could hold the sales for a little while out of frustration, Jim smashes a payphone. Jim then has a private meeting with Eugene, a lead engineer formerly at Nintendo. He recruits him, but also recruits Charles, a man who also works there. Eugene was hired to help design the Mobitech's architecture alongside Paul Santos and Mike, and after joining, Eugene warns Mike that Charles could be dangerous if given control of engineering. Mike later learns that Charles had been hired as COO specifically to keep the company under tight control, though Mike believes Doug was already running things, but when he looks at him, he couldn't argue, saying nothing.
Yeah, okay, yeah, alright.
Mike, Eugene, and Paul gather to discuss. The team decides to split the network so that each phone can operate as its own system, but that means encrypting every connection. During the conversation, Mike thinks of something and scratches something on paper before running out, and after he leaves, Paul asks how much Eugene was getting paid, and Eugene says that he can't share, and Paul tells him that it's $10 million. Eugene tells him that he's getting paid the same, and Mike rushes back to his office and notices something alarming. The engineers were playing games instead of doing work. He goes to Charles and apologizes for the engineer's behavior.
Hello. Michael's had a breakthrough.
And Charles shows up and gives a task to one of them. He warns that the task must be completed by Friday. The engineer tells him that it would take a month and that it is bad luck to work on movie nights. Hearing this, Charles calls them children, and he orders everyone to act like men, and threatens to fire people until there are no more boys left. Doug comes back after a while and discovers that movie night had been cancelled and employees are being forced to work overtime. Angry, he confronts Mike, but Mike dismisses his concern and says that everyone needs to stay focused.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, Verizon's Woodman wanted to end their partnership after the phones crashed and once the user base hit 500,000. Jim refuses to let that happen, claiming that they've upgraded the system to handle 2 million users and have already sold 1 million devices.
As of right now, Verizon is capable of carrying 2 million BlackBerries at the same time.
By 2007, BlackBerry had become the leading handheld device brand, yet Mike still refused to move production to China. When the marketing team tries to contact Jim about new campaigns, he ignores the calls and tells Mike to handle everything. The engineers gather to watch Steve Jobs introduce the iPhone, which surprises them because it doesn't have a physical keyboard.
CEO of Singular, Stan Sigman.
Soon after, the SEC summons Doug to question him about Paul Santos' hiring, but Doug hangs up the call, saying that he doesn't know anything. Jim, meanwhile, meets with representatives from the NHL, expressing interest in purchasing the Hamilton Tigers hockey team.
Okay, sorry, I thought you were buying the Pittsburgh Penguins?
Around the same time, Mike receives the new BlackBerry Bold to present to Verizon, and since Jim couldn't make the pitch, Doug goes along instead.
360 HVGA screen, and to top it all off,
Mike presents their new model, and Woodman asks about the iPhone's new technology, but Mike dismisses the iPhone as a flawed concept, convinced it will crash its own servers and fail under pressure. Seeing that they weren't satisfied, Mike makes up a new model that they will release in the future, a model that is like the iPhone. He explains that it will have similar features, but with a signature click sensation that will distinguish the BlackBerry as their own trademark innovation. Back in the shop, Mike shares his idea, and the engineering team struggles to understand what he wants because Mike wants to keep the click sound of BlackBerry, but also wants to have a full screen like the iPhone.
We pay you a lot of money. This is really not hard.
Soon after, Mike learns that unless they move production to China, they will lose their customers to competitors, and Doug argues against it, saying that it's morally wrong. But Mike dismisses him as unhelpful and pushes ahead with manufacturing overseas. At the same time, Jim discovers that Apple is outselling BlackBerry by a large margin. Mike goes to Jim's office and asks why the SEC was looking into them, and Jim brushes it off as nothing. Determined to stay ahead, Jim agrees to a meeting with Stan, the CEO of AT&T. The plan was to fly by private jet to JFK for a board meeting in New York, and then continue on to Atlanta to see Stan. Meanwhile, the SEC agents agree to talk to Mike and they ask for passwords to everything. Mike asks why he was being asked, and they ask if he was hiding something.
Jim.
During the same period, Jim learns that the board had blocked his attempt to buy a hockey team because he planned to move it to Canada. And furious, he threatens a hostile takeover of the entire league.
I said let's go! Delay signal.
The SEC agents kept looking through files. One agent tells Mike that the contracts of the engineers that he hired offer backdated stock options, and they were illegally pricing their own shares to hire the engineers with money that they don't have. And Mike confesses that they have no idea what was really going on, and admits that he's only a co-CEO in name. When Jim finally gets Stan on the phone, he tells him that he will give him 500,000 BlackBerries for AT&T for $0, and that he will have to release them at discount 1 month before the iPhone. Stan ends the call with a cryptic remark, and Mike urgently tells Jim to return to the company right away. When Jim arrives, he discovers that Mike had struck a deal with the SEC in exchange for Jim's seat on the board and a payment of $183 million, and the agency agrees not to take control of the company. By 2008, Mike had become the sole CEO, and he walks through a warehouse stacked with BlackBerry phones that have been mass-produced in China, only to realize that they're all manufactured with a constant white noise issue. To fix the problem, every single phone had to be repaired by hand. Eventually, the entire batch of BlackBerry Storm devices was returned by customers, leading Verizon to sue the company for $500 million. The fallout was too much to recover from, and Mike resigns in 2012. Jim manages to avoid prison despite the SEC investigation, while Doug, who sold his shares back in 2007, becomes incredibly wealthy.